Ace Combat is a franchise that has spanned over the years, shipping over 20 million copies worldwide, with some being critically acclaimed and others not doing so well. But how did we get here? Well, we have to go all the way back to 1995 with the release of Air Combat on the PS1. Of course, localization is a funny thing, with the Japanese release being called Ace Combat like we would know the later franchise titles to be called, while the international release is called Air Combat. This is probably to make it seem like it is a console release of the arcade game of the same name called Air Combat 22, in which it was originally designed to be one, before the people that were developing the game realized that the PS1 didn't have enough power to directly port the game over, so instead they just created their own game and called it Air Combat for the internationals, and then just called it Ace Combat in Japan. Before we get into the game itself, you have to understand the story, and to save time, because the story for the game is nearly a minute-long text scroll that is really slow, and the voice doesn't actually match the text that you see on the screen, I'm just going to tell you what the story is up to the point where we are able to play the game. Strange Real, a place that looks like Earth, has the same minerals as Earth, but also looks like as if someone drew Earth while a little bit too intoxicated. In the year of 1995, a coup d'etat broke out in the Scully Islands, which is a small area just off of Uja, and this unnamed force took things over rather quickly, almost too quickly, and any attempts made by the loyalists to the nation were foiled. So the government hires the player's mercenary group known as Scarface to help them reclaim the Scully Islands and squash any chance of retaliation. Then the player is shown a mission map and given a few options. First, we're going to check out the hangar. The hangar is where the player can purchase planes, once you unlock them from completing missions and using the money that you earned from said missions. You can also see the amount of planes that you have purchased as these little tokens in the bottom left of the screen. These are also your life counters, as Ace Combat uses a little bit more of its arcade roots in this sense, by letting you only have one of each of the planes that you have purchased. And so if you crash them, you kind of just lose the plane entirely, which means that a lot of missions can get pretty intense. But in some strange but real universe, it is technically a nuzlocke before even nuzlocks existed. On the opposite side is the stats readout for the chosen aircraft. Namco didn't want the planes to use any realistic statistics, as that would overly complicate their little arcade flight title. So instead, they seem to have drunkenly given each one of the planes a stat total by rolling D20s or D6s in this case, which is the reason why you get Giga Chad planes like the MiG-31 that just boast an attack stat of 5, but then you also get aircraft that seem to just exist for some reason. This is also a good time to mention that the difficulty that the player chooses will also affect what aircraft they will find waiting for them at the start of the game. Since I chose easy to get the video prepared as quick as possible, I had the choice of the MiG-29, the F-14, and the F-4, but if you choose the hard difficulty, you only get the F-4 Phantom to start with. Back to the missions at hand, the first few missions in the game are not the most entertaining missions for the Ace Combat franchise and can be grouped together in the form of fly into the air, shoot big slow thing out of the air, repeat until mission is done. These missions are designed to put the player into a low stress environment, learn the controls and how the planes fly, but also are designed so that way a player that is completely new can pick up any game in the franchise and still have a fun time without having to play all the games in sequence because they didn't give you a tutorial, say in Ace Combat 0, and now you have to go back to play Ace Combat 1 in order to figure out how the planes fly. It's actually pretty nice. The first thing that I will point out is that the controls may feel a little bit off to a player at first, as the plane will auto-center and it feels like there's only 4 directions to move. This is because the controls are set to the arcade novice controls by default, and the player has to go from the main menu before they start playing, as you cannot back out of the game once it's started, and go into the settings to change them to the more familiar expert controls that give you like all the different directions to move, and you can control every single facet of how the aircraft moves. The other thing I will point out is that the game really wants you to play it in first person, as the first person view has all of your gauges such as airspeed, altitude, and the timer for the mission, represented by the fuel gauge in the top left hand corner. Swapping into third person gives you the ability to see more around you, but removes any of the information the player may need, and this was before the invention of the DualShock analog controller, so you don't even get the ability to look around your polygonal aircraft. The fourth mission is where the game changes things up just a tiny bit, as it introduces two new mechanics at the same time: ground attack and also your wingman. But also, this is one of the only major changes in the scenery throughout the entire game, as it is a nighttime flight through a city. Otherwise, you really don't get to see too much of anything else, as it's mostly just deserts, mountains, and ocean. That's basically the major three that you get to see, and the environments themselves aren't really super detailed, so you're not missing out on too much. Using the credits that you do earn from missions that you've completed before, you can hire another pilot to fly alongside you. They have unique call signs in aircraft, and can be given orders from protecting the player to performing certain objectives. Although, thanks to the AI being rather primitive, most of the time they are just flying missile distractions, and they just go off and distract the enemy for you, so that way you can actually finish your objective. But with this ground attack mission comes one of my favorite songs in the entire game. The soundtrack in this game is already stellar, but Night and Day is just absolutely amazing to listen to, and sometimes I'll have it in the background when I'm editing, so that way I can stay focused, because it's just one of my favorite songs in the entire game. As we were blowing up one of the final buildings, this is where I would like to mention that one of the major changes in Ace Combat was in relation to its story. Originally, the story was meant to be more realistic and in the real world, with Yuzha being replaced by NATO. I am glad that Namco stuck with Strange Reel, as a mission where you fly a jet in a real world city to blow up skyscrapers would not have aged well. Now we get to see one of the things that would be seen in some of the later titles in the franchise, and that is the next set of missions introduce branching paths, where the player can choose what missions they want to do, as both 5 and 6 are open for the player to choose. Both missions are very similar, as they are ground attack missions, and for the full experience I will be playing every single mission that is available in the game. The former, however, though, is one of the most boring missions I think I have ever played in an Ace Combat game. Mission 5 sees the player going through a large desert, crippling the enemy faction by starving them of their oil supply by reducing the refineries to dust. Sounds fine and dandy until you realize that the one way you're going to find the refineries is by following the pipeline that twists and turns, and often ends up popping in due to the limited draw distance of the map, and also the texture of the desert makes it very easy to get turned around sometimes. At least the 6th mission is over quickly, as it is destroying mining equipment that is relatively close together and pretty easy to attack, but completing these missions will unlock other missions in the respective paths, meaning that speedrunning this game is mostly finding the path that you can be the most efficient at playing. Next up is a mission that I think everybody in the Ace Combat franchise will be familiar with. The goal of the mission is to run from one end of a narrow canyon to the other. Thankfully, because of the early power of the PlayStation 1, the canyon isn't too complex. However, you can still lose an aircraft, as you may tap a wall with the very pixel of your wing, and there goes a life. One of the things to note about the briefing, though, is that they do point out that you have an altitude restriction because there's a nested SAM kill zone that they have set up over the canyon. In specific, they mentioned that we do not have the countermeasures to avoid it. We don't have countermeasures at all in the game. Your plane has no flares or any chaff or anything to deflect missiles away from you, so flying up is just instant death. The saving grace for this mission is that the canyon is pretty wide, and the limited graphics of the PS1 do help out with the navigation, as they can't make it too complicated, which is actually one of the points that a lot of the reviewers pointed out with the game, is that it looked rather dated. There was flickering textures and pretty poor presentation across the board. Thankfully, when I emulated the copy of the game that I have, I was able to fix up a lot of the textures flickering around, so the game may look a little bit better than it did originally, but I did notice that if you play the game natively, the game does have a lot of problems with textures popping in and out and flickering and stuff like that. Even with how they designed the canyon to be a little bit easier to navigate, you can still have some anus clenching moments like this.
Enemy in sight. Enemy in sight. Enemy locked on target. Bingo! Yahoo!
That was the luckiest fucking amount of turning I think I've ever done in this game ever. Holy shit. Holy crap. That is the luckiest amount of turning I have ever done in this game ever in my entire life. Holy shit.
Located.
The 8th mission does bring something that is only mentioned in the 6th mission, and that is stealth aircraft. The enemy has gotten their hands onto the B-2 Spirit, and the mechanic for them is that your missiles won't lock onto them unless you are very close to them, and they don't appear on your radar. After that, the mission becomes to shoot some bombers in the midst of some rocks, trees, overly boiled broccoli. I have no idea what that texture is, and I almost crashed in the process of blowing up the bombers that were on the ground, mostly because I was distracted by the funky texture. But afterwards, we are heading off to the well-named Navy Island. This is an ocean port base, if you can't tell, and it is a much more wet version of Sand Island found in Ace Combat 5. Thankfully, the objective is just to smash up this port, which contains some oil, a singular bomber, and a boat. This is where I'm going to point out that this game has a surprising amount of variation. There are very few missions that repeat themselves. Most of the time they don't use the same locales, although with how the graphics look at times, it would be surprising if you could pick out any landmarks with this. And after this, we do some minor things like protecting a VIP while flying over the mountains, which mostly was me just leaving them to go off and destroy the aircraft before they even had a chance to do anything. Repelling enemy bombers, including some stealth bombers from the base we just destroyed because they want it back for its tactical advantages. Destroying an entire enemy fleet and their mothership, which turns out to be just an aircraft carrier. Weird way of naming that one there, guys. But the mission is in the middle of the ocean, so you don't have any landmarks, which is, I always see it as a good way to describe the limitations of the console, because if you paint everything blue, you don't have to worry about all that fancy rendering stuff. However, one of the more unique missions that I noticed was the Recon mission, which is the 13th mission, and the one mission I actually missed out in the original Ace Combat video that I made. As you think it's a lone recon mission, and you pick an aircraft that is not the best at fighting. But once you approach the lone bomber on the ground, it suddenly turns into a stealth YF-23 ambush, as the whole bunch of them just show up and start attacking you. Personally, I found that really nice, because it's the sudden shakeup that keeps the players on their toes about the missions that they will be doing and what aircraft they choose, as you don't know what you're going to be running into. And also I picked a MiG-31, which doesn't exactly have the best turning radius, and the mission took me way longer because I was flying around in circles for half of it. The 14th mission, sadly, is just a reminder of the 5th mission, as it involves blowing up a fuel refinery in the middle of a desert, and is one of the missions I like the least. I just found it rather boring. Then again, I'm not the biggest fan of air-to-ground combat, and once we cripple the enemy's supply lines, it's off to the final act. The final act, though, is where the game ramps up, with the enemy being on the run, and we are just attempting to capture the last base in the Scully Islands. We are tasked with destroying the bridge that they are using to supply said base, cutting it off from the mainland. I decided to be a little bit cheeky and fly down the supports of the totally not Golden Gate Bridge, taking out all 3 pieces with a single pass. The objectives on the ground aren't moving, so that makes them pretty easy to take out. The second to last mission did make me confused because it's called Strike, which normally would make me believe that you are striking the final enemy base of some secret super weapon, but instead you are just flying from one side of a tunnel to the other. Oh, it's trying to set up a strike on the last stand of the enemy. The enemy has an airborne fortress that is slowly flying towards the Scully Islands. Now, you may notice that this design of the very slow aircraft is a lot like the XB-01 Race Valgar from the nation of Belka, which in all honesty does make a lot of sense if you know anything about Grunder Industries and their supply of super weapons that is only explored in later games. It's almost like Ace Combat 1 takes place after the events of the Balkan War. The mission itself, though, isn't the most difficult thing ever, as each engine only takes around 2 missiles, and the only true threat to the player besides becoming a smear on the wing of the fortress is the SAMs and the gun placements all over it. The main body will open up for attack after all of the engines are out, and it only takes 4 missiles to destroy it, and this is what happened during the final mission. I gotta get above you here.
Enemy locked on target. Bingo! Jesus missed!
Jesus missed? What do you mean Jesus missed?
Jesus didn't take the wheel. I love the music in the background for this fight though, because it's so ethereal compared to the rest of the soundtrack. Which is like the norm for the super weapons in Ace Combat. They normally have that kind of etherealness to them where they're like, ooh, spooky in the air. You see
Enemy
this
in
thing,
sight.
it's spooky. Can you turn the other way?
Caution.
Enemy
Caution.
locked on target.
That should be it. There we go. Hey, deathless run of Ace Combat. Let's go.
Congratulations. The enemy has capitulated and the coup has failed. The rightful government has been restored to this peaceful country.
I need to Google what that
Your
word
skill as
means.
top guns changed the balance. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you.
Oh, they surrendered. Cool. And with the dropping of the Air Fortress, Ace Combat 1 draws to a close and Yuja is at peace. At least until someone else decides that they don't like them or their government. At the end of the day, Ace Combat is a rather fun experience. Sure, it's not the most graphically impressive game out there, as even on an emulator it has some issues with textures looking rather wobbly, planes alpha channels being odd so you can see right through the engines and into the world below. The world often does look plain and sometimes the land below oddly blends into the skybox rather well, making it so you're unsure where the ground is sometimes. But at the same time, you can really see how much the media of the time influenced the game, with the main two being the anime Area 88 and of course Top Gun, as the soundtrack has that very Top Gun feel, while the plot of Area 88 you can see inspired some of the... You can also really see how the media of the time influenced Ace Combat, with the main two being the anime Area 88 and of course Top Gun, as the soundtrack has that very Top Gun feel, while the plot of Area 88 you can see inspired some of the plots with the pilots of a fictional country fighting pilots from another fictional country, with plenty of times for banter and comedic moments. The one thing I will note is that there is a lack of aircraft to play, but probably due to licensing and time constraints, the roster is limited to 16 main aircraft, and limited slots does make you have to think about which ones you really purchase at the end of the day. I can say this about the game, however, that it is just plain fun. Hands down, if you have the time to try it out, go for it. Sure, it doesn't have the most replayability in the franchise, as in the long run, it is just very linear, but with the added life system, it can be quite fun for challenge runs, and it is always good to look back on these older games with a magnifying glass as you can see the advancements in tech and writing as the games go on. Also, how Project Aces has to retcon or bend their current story around what they have written before. It's actually kind of funny because you can see it a lot with Ace Combat 2 going into like Ace Combat 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. How they had to like make this world because they have so many different time periods. It's amazing. It really is. And that is all I really have to say about Ace Combat 1, the game that is first in the franchise, and without it, we wouldn't have the series that we know today. And the next video, I'll be taking a look at Ace Combat 2, so look for that in the next coming week or so. And with that, I will see you next time. This is Kuro Keats signing out. Peace.